Let me start by saying this clearly, because a lot of people misunderstand this situation. Just because something is forbidden does not mean it is imaginary. And just because someone doesn't act on their feelings does not mean those feelings are not real. Now listen carefully. There are moments in life where two people meet and the connection is undeniable, but the timing is wrong, the circumstances are complicated, or the situation carries consequences. This is not romance from a movie. This is real life. And when a man finds himself emotionally pulled towards someone he believes he cannot have, something very powerful happens inside him. This is not about games. This is about psychology. This is about emotional pressure. And this is about human behavior. And when a man is crazy about you but believes the relationship is forbidden, it means two very important things. And you need to understand them clearly so you don't misread the situation or lose yourself emotionally. When a man is deeply attracted but restrained, his emotions do not weaken over time, they intensify. This is not poetry or exaggeration. It is a psychological response rooted in how the human mind reacts to limitation. When something feels out of reach, the brain assigns it greater value. Desire is not fueled only by access. Very often it is fueled by denial. And this is where many people misunderstand the forbidden connection. They assume distance means detachment, when in reality, distance can act like pressure building behind a wall. A man who believes he cannot pursue a relationship does not simply turn his feelings off like a switch. Men are logical in many ways, but they are not immune to emotional attachment. When logic tells him this is not allowed, while emotion whispers this feels right, an internal conflict begins. That conflict forces his emotions inward. Instead of being expressed freely, they are stored, suppressed, and analyzed. And what is suppressed does not die. It concentrates. From an educational standpoint, psychologists explain this through the concept of cognitive restriction. When the mind is told it must not engage with a particular thought, person, or desire, that very restriction keeps the object of desire active in consciousness. The man may distract himself with work, routines, or social life, but the emotional pull resurfaces in quiet moments, late at night, during pauses, or when something reminds him of you. This is not weakness, it is how the brain handles unresolved emotional energy. Another critical factor is identity. Men often define themselves by control, discipline, and decision-making. When a man feels something he believes he should not feel, it challenges his self-image. He does not just question the relationship, he questions himself. Why am I feeling this way? Why can't I let this go? Why does this person affect me? These questions deepen emotional involvement rather than dissolving it, because now the feeling is tied to a sense of self and internal struggle. It is also important to understand that restraint can transform attraction into idealization. When interaction is limited, the mind fills in the gaps. The man begins to associate you not only with who you are, but with how you make him feel: calm, understood, alive, or seen. In forbidden situations, there is less opportunity for conflict, routine boredom, or emotional exhaustion. As a result, the connection can feel unusually pure, intense, and meaningful in his mind. This does not mean it is unrealistic, but it does mean it is emotionally amplified. Educationally speaking, this is why forbidden connections often feel more powerful than openly available ones. Availability allows reality to balance emotion. Restriction removes that balance. The feelings remain untested by everyday challenges, which can make them feel stronger and more consuming. For a man, this can be both intoxicating and frightening. He may crave the emotional high while simultaneously fearing the consequences of acting on it. This inner tension often leads to inconsistent behavior. He may pull close emotionally, then suddenly pull away. He may show care in subtle ways while avoiding direct commitment. This is not always manipulation. Often it is confusion. His emotions are strong, but his sense of responsibility, fear of judgment, or concern about consequences acts like a brake. The stronger the emotion, the harder he presses that brake. What is crucial for understanding and for self-protection is recognizing that intensity does not equal intention. Strong feelings do not automatically lead to action. A man can feel deeply and still choose restraint. This does not make his feelings fake, but it does mean that feelings alone are not a promise. From an educational and emotional maturity perspective, this distinction matters greatly. It helps separate emotional reality from practical reality. Another key point is that restrained attraction often creates emotional memory. Because interactions are limited, each moment carries more weight. Conversations are remembered. Small gestures are replayed. The brain stores these moments with heightened emotional significance. Over time, this builds a private emotional narrative that can feel very real to him, even if it is never spoken aloud. This is why such connections can linger in a man's mind long after circumstances change. However, understanding this dynamic is not about romanticizing suffering or waiting indefinitely. It is about clarity. Knowing that restraint intensifies emotion allows you to interpret behavior more accurately, but it also reminds you of an essential truth. Emotional tension is not the same as emotional safety. A connection that lives mainly in restriction can be emotionally powerful, but it can also be emotionally draining if it lacks resolution. From a learning standpoint, the most important takeaway is balance. When you understand that his restraint may be increasing his feelings, you gain insight, but you must also maintain your own boundaries. Emotional intensity should never be mistaken for destiny. It is simply a response to limitation. Awareness gives you power to empathize without overinvesting, to understand without self-sacrifice, and to value yourself regardless of whether the situation ever changes. In the end, restraint does not erase desire. It refines it, sharpens it, and sometimes magnifies it beyond what action ever could. But maturity lies in knowing that while emotions may intensify in silence, your worth does not depend on being someone's unspoken struggle. When a relationship feels forbidden, the greatest battle does not happen between two people. It happens inside one mind. A man caught in this situation is often pulled in opposite directions, experiencing a quiet but intense war between logic and emotion. Logic speaks in the language of consequences, responsibility, and self-preservation. Emotion speaks in the language of connection, desire, and meaning. When these two forces collide, the result is inner conflict, and that conflict shapes nearly every behavior he shows. From an educational perspective, this conflict is a classic example of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance occurs when a person holds two opposing beliefs or desires at the same time. In this case, one belief says, I should not be involved here, while the other says, I feel deeply connected to this person. The mind does not like inconsistency. It seeks resolution. But when neither belief can be easily dismissed, tension increases rather than resolves. This tension is emotionally exhausting and mentally consuming. Logic for many men is tied to identity. Being rational, dependable, and in control is often how they measure self-respect. When emotions arise that threaten this identity, the instinctive reaction is not to surrender, but to suppress. He may attempt to reason his way out of his feelings. He may list risks, remind himself of rules, or focus on long-term consequences. Yet emotion does not respond to logic the way a problem on paper does. Feelings do not disappear simply because they are inconvenient. Emotion, on the other hand, operates on a different system. It is shaped by chemistry, shared moments, and emotional resonance. When a man feels understood, energized, or emotionally safe with someone, those feelings attach deeply. Even if logic insists the situation is wrong, emotion continues to surface. especially during moments of vulnerability or solitude. This is why inner conflict can feel relentless. Logic may dominate during the day, but emotion often takes over at night. This internal struggle often results in contradictory behavior. A man may show warmth and interest, then suddenly retreat. He may communicate intensely for a period, then go silent. To an outside observer, this can appear confusing or even hurtful. Educationally, however, it reflects an unresolved psychological tug-of-war. He is not moving forward because logic restrains him, and he is not moving on because emotion anchors him. Fear plays a powerful role in this conflict. Logic is often fueled by fear. Fear of loss, fear of judgment, fear of disrupting stability, fear of consequences that extend beyond the relationship itself. Emotion, meanwhile, is fueled by longing and possibility. The man is not only weighing what he feels now, but what he might lose if he acts. This fear can amplify indecision, making every step feel risky and every pause feel heavy. Another layer of this conflict involves moral or social conditioning. Many men are taught to honor rules, commitments, and societal expectations. When emotions challenge these values, guilt can emerge. Guilt does not erase desire, but it complicates it. The man may feel drawn to someone while simultaneously believing that feeling makes him a bad or irresponsible person. This internal judgment increases emotional stress and can lead to emotional withdrawal as a form of self-punishment. From a learning standpoint, it is important to understand that unresolved inner conflict consumes mental energy. A man experiencing this may appear distracted, emotionally distant, or inconsistent in other areas of life. His mind is busy negotiating with itself. He is constantly recalculating what is the right thing to do versus what feels true to me. This ongoing negotiation leaves little space for clarity or decisive action. This is also why time alone rarely resolves the issue. Without a clear internal decision, distance does not heal the conflict. It simply pauses it. Emotion waits. Logic stays alert. The conflict remains dormant until something triggers it again, a message, a memory, or a reminder. This cycle can repeat for long periods, keeping both individuals emotionally suspended. For the person on the other side of this dynamic, understanding the inner conflict is essential, but so is self-awareness. Inner struggle does not automatically translate into readiness or capacity for a healthy relationship. A man who is torn between logic and emotion may feel deeply, but feeling deeply does not mean he can act responsibly or consistently. Emotional understanding should never replace personal boundaries. Educational maturity involves recognizing that inner conflict is not a promise of future action. It is a sign of emotional tension, not emotional resolution. While empathy allows you to see the human struggle behind the behavior, wisdom reminds you not to carry the emotional weight for someone else. His conflict is his to resolve, not yours to endure. Ultimately, the battle between logic and emotion reveals something important about human nature. Feelings do not obey rules, but actions do. And until a man resolves that internal divide, until logic and emotion align, he will remain emotionally split. Understanding this truth protects you from misinterpretation, false hope, and emotional exhaustion, and allows you to engage with clarity rather than confusion. When a man is emotionally invested but constrained by circumstances, his behavior often shifts in ways that are easily misunderstood. Silence, distance, or inconsistency are commonly interpreted as signs of disinterest. From an educational and psychological perspective, however, these behaviors can stem from fear rather than a lack of feeling. Understanding this distinction is crucial because it changes how actions are interpreted and how emotional boundaries are maintained. Fear is a powerful regulator of behavior. When a man believes that acting on his emotions could lead to loss, conflict, or irreversible consequences, his nervous system goes into protection mode. Instead of moving closer, he pulls back. This response is not always conscious. It is a form of emotional self-defense. The mind calculates risk and chooses avoidance as a way to reduce perceived danger. In such cases, distance is not the absence of care. It is an attempt to control overwhelming emotion. Silence, in particular, plays a significant role in forbidden or complicated emotional connections. When a man goes quiet, it does not necessarily mean his thoughts have stopped. Often, it means the opposite. Silence becomes a space where he tries to regain control over feelings that feel too strong or too disruptive. By limiting communication, he limits stimulation. He believes that if he reduces contact, he can reduce emotional intensity. Psychologically, this is a common coping strategy, even though it rarely works as intended. Inconsistency is another byproduct of fear-driven behavior. A man may reach out when emotion overpowers fear, then withdraw when fear regains control. This push and pull dynamic is confusing for the person on the receiving end, but internally it reflects alternating emotional states. In moments of longing or vulnerability, he moves closer. In moments of clarity or anxiety, he steps back. Neither state fully wins, so behavior fluctuates. From a learning standpoint, it is important to recognize that fear often disguises itself as rational decision-making. A man may tell himself that distance is the right thing to do, even when that decision causes emotional discomfort. This allows him to justify withdrawal without fully confronting his feelings. Over time, this pattern can become habitual. Distance becomes the default response whenever emotion feels too strong. Another critical factor is the fear of exposure. Acting on forbidden feelings risks being seen by others or by oneself in a way that challenges identity. A man may fear being judged, misunderstood, or labeled for emotions he did not plan to have. Silence offers privacy. Distance offers protection. These behaviors create a psychological buffer between desire and consequence. Educational psychology also highlights the role of emotional regulation. Many men are not taught to openly process complex emotions. Instead, they are taught to manage feelings by controlling behavior. When emotions feel unmanageable, behavior becomes restrictive. This is why a man may choose absence over honest conversation. It feels safer to disappear than to explain something he does not fully understand himself. However, while fear-based distance may protect him, it often creates emotional ambiguity for the other person. Without context, silence can feel like rejection. Inconsistency can feel like emotional instability. This is why understanding motivation is helpful, but it should never come at the cost of self-respect. Fear explains behavior, but it does not excuse emotional neglect. It is also important to note that prolonged fear-driven distance can erode emotional connection over time. While feelings may remain, trust and security weaken, emotional bonds require clarity and consistency to thrive. When interaction is governed by fear, the relationship remains emotionally suspended, unable to progress or resolve. From an educational perspective, the key lesson here is discernment. Recognizing that silence or distance may be rooted in fear allows for empathy, but empathy must be balanced with boundaries. You are not responsible for easing someone else's fear at the expense of your emotional well-being. Understanding the reason behind behavior does not mean you must accept its impact. Ultimately, fear-driven distance reveals a deeper truth. Emotional interest alone is not enough. Emotional courage matters just as much. A man may feel deeply and still choose avoidance if fear outweighs readiness. Knowing this helps separate emotional reality from relational possibility. It empowers you to interpret behavior accurately, protect your emotional health, and avoid mistaking silence for a lack of worth. In the end, distance born from fear is a sign of inner conflict, not emotional emptiness. But lasting connection requires more than feeling. It requires the willingness to face fear, communicate honestly, and act with consistency. Understanding this distinction is essential for emotional clarity and self-respect. Understanding a forbidden emotional dynamic is not just about interpreting someone else's behavior. It is also about protecting and strengthening your own emotional foundation. When a situation is unclear or emotionally charged, knowledge becomes a form of self-respect. The ability to understand what is happening without becoming consumed by it is a sign of emotional maturity. This is where empowerment begins, not in control over another person, but in clarity within yourself. One of the most important lessons in this dynamic is learning the difference between secrecy and commitment. Secrecy can feel intense. It can feel special, deep, and meaningful because it exists in a private emotional space. Commitment, however, is not private. Commitment is visible, consistent, and grounded in action. Educationally speaking, confusing secrecy with commitment is one of the most common emotional traps in forbidden or complicated relationships. Awareness of this distinction allows you to appreciate emotional connection without attaching false promises to it. Self-worth plays a central role here. When someone is emotionally drawn to you but unwilling or unable to act openly, it can quietly challenge your sense of value. You may begin to wonder if patience will eventually be rewarded or if understanding his struggle makes you responsible for enduring uncertainty. Empowerment means recognizing that your value is not measured by how deeply someone feels in silence, but by how clearly and respectfully they can show up in your life. Another key element of empowerment is boundary awareness. Boundaries are not punishments. They are frameworks for emotional safety. In emotionally restricted situations, boundaries prevent you from becoming emotionally overinvested in an outcome you do not control. From an educational standpoint, boundaries help regulate emotional energy. They ensure that empathy does not turn into self-sacrifice and that understanding does not turn into waiting without direction. Clarity also protects against emotional burnout. Prolonged uncertainty can create chronic stress, especially when hope and doubt coexist. Understanding the dynamics at play allows you to step out of emotional guessing. Instead of constantly interpreting signals, you learn to observe patterns. Consistency, availability, and transparency become your metrics, not intensity or emotional tension. This shift in perspective is deeply empowering because it recenters your emotional experience around stability rather than anticipation. Another empowering lesson is the acceptance of limits. Not every emotionally intense connection is meant to evolve into a relationship. This does not diminish its meaning, but it does define its role in your life. Educational maturity involves acknowledging that some connections are catalysts for growth rather than destinations. They teach you what you need, what you value, and what you will no longer tolerate. This reframing transforms emotional disappointment into personal insight. It is also essential to understand that responsibility for resolution lies with the person experiencing the restriction. You cannot resolve someone else's fear, conflict, or indecision through patience alone. Waiting does not create readiness. Change occurs only when an individual chooses alignment between feeling and action. Empowerment comes from releasing the illusion that love or understanding can substitute for personal accountability. From a psychological standpoint, emotional independence is a key outcome of this awareness. Emotional independence does not mean emotional detachment. It means emotional stability. You can care without clinging. You can understand without excusing. You can feel without losing direction. This balance allows you to engage with others from a place of strength rather than uncertainty. Empowerment also involves redefining success in emotional relationships. Success is not measured by whether a situation eventually works out, but by whether you remain emotionally whole throughout the experience. Maintaining dignity, clarity, and self-respect is a success regardless of outcome. This perspective reduces fear of loss and increases confidence in decision-making. Ultimately, understanding this dynamic teaches a deeper life lesson. You do not need to be chosen in secrecy to be worthy of love. You do not need to be someone's internal struggle to be valuable. True empowerment is knowing when emotional insight has served its purpose and when it is time to prioritize your own emotional well-being. In the end, knowledge gives you freedom. It frees you from false narratives, from emotional overinvestment, and from waiting for clarity that only someone else can provide. When you understand the difference between emotional intensity and emotional availability, you step into a position of strength where your peace is not dependent on someone else's indecision, but anchored in your own self-respect.